Welcome to episode 5 of Fully Disclosed Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Brad Lose. And before I get started today, I actually want to note something interesting that I saw. On our SoundCloud page, we can see, we can't see the people themselves, but we can see the countries that people are located in when they like or share or repost our files. And I noticed that we had a very interesting repost from somebody in Mongolia on one of our episodes. So if you are that person in Mongolia and you're listening to this episode right now, please email me at fullydisclosedpodcast@gmail.com because I want to talk to you. That's just really interesting. Again, fullydisclosedpodcast@gmail.com. All right. Today's episode is actually, this guy is awesome. Clyde Peeling joined me for an interview, and I have no idea why he sat down to talk to me, but he did. He's a super nice guy. For anyone who doesn't know him, he is the owner of Reptiland. He says Reptiland instead of Reptiland because it is spelled without the E, I think. I think that's why he pronounces it that way, which is kind of neat. Actually, it sets it even further apart. I actually disappointed myself a little bit with this interview. I'm going to apologize to him and to everybody listening. I think I didn't do as well on this interview with him as I think I should have done, but hey, it was a learning experience. I'm only going to get better at doing what I do. So hopefully at some point he'll be willing to sit down and talk to me again, and I can do a little better next time. But again, he runs Reptiland. It's on Route 15 between Williamsport and Lewisburg, and near a town called Allenwood. You can find their website. It's reptiland.com. That's REPTILAND.com. Reptiland.com. So enjoy our interview with him, and enjoy. Again, we still don't have our intro music done. Our DJ, I believe, is actually out of state right now doing a show. So the music today will be from Uncharted 2. I felt it to be a little more appropriate to go with some more adventurous music for the guy coming in to talk about Reptiland. Sorry. But please, if you are listening to this, and I hope that you are, please share us with your friends on Facebook, on SoundCloud, on YouTube, on iTunes. It really doesn't matter. We are in all of these formats, so please share us with your friends because that's really the only way I'm going to grow. And please, if you have any feedback for me, if you think I could be doing better with something, if you want to hear something different, or even if you're interested in being on, please email us. I'll say it again, fullydisclosedpodcast@gmail.com. All right, so sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Clyde Peeling. Binge watch? Like, what's on TV right now that you would put on?
I almost never.
You don't really watch TV?
I mean, I watch it in the middle of the night sometimes.
Yeah.
But primarily news channels.
News channels? Okay.
Almost never watch programming.
How about like books or music? Or...
I read a lot, especially about biology. Evolution is a passion of mine. But the only fiction I read is when I'm in a book group, and sometimes, somebody chooses a book of fiction, but generally I'm a nonfiction.
Generally a nonfiction kind of guy. Yeah. Is there one guy in particular that maybe writes a lot that you follow, or?
I would say my two intellectual heroes would be one who's no longer with us, Charles Darwin.
Okay.
And the second would probably have to be Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins? Okay. I have read a couple of his books.
Dawkins actually visited here,
I
don't know, 10, 12 years ago. He did a lecture at Bucknell and came up the next morning, and we went out to lunch, and it was an enjoyable day, spending some time with what I would say is one of the great minds of our time.
Definitely. I mean, it's always nice to meet somebody like this, especially someone you've read and, oh my God, I agree with you so much. And you get to meet him. So let's start off. I know you have a couple of alligators here, Rocky and Adrian. How long have they been here?
The male, which is about 11 feet, 600 pounds, came here from Jacksonville Zoo, and without going out and checking the record cards, I would guess around 10 years.
About 10 years or so?
And we had a couple of big ones prior to that. We had one that was close to 12 feet and about 800 pounds, and another one slightly smaller, but they were both males, and they fought, and eventually the dominant male essentially caused the death of the subordinate male.
Okay.
And eventually even that one died of old age, because these were big animals that had come from St. Augustine Alligator Farm, and they probably were in the neighborhood of 60, 70 years old. So I think that primarily they died of old age.
Right. Okay. Now, is it an issue, or the alligators, or dealing with reptiles of that size and nature in particular, is that ever an issue for the handlers here? Or are they pretty much the temperamental from being in a zoo in captivity, or are they fairly...
Alligators do tame down much more easily than do crocodiles.
Okay.
And hopefully our staff has been around them enough that they kind of know their own limitations and the limitations of the animal. There's always a risk. The head of our animal department, when he was working at Birmingham Zoo, was moving about a 10-foot alligator, and it grabbed him on the leg and snapped his leg, and he ended up with deep tissue infection and blood clots on the lung. It could have been a fatal bite, as it turned out. But we don't want our staff to put themselves in a position where they're going to get chomped on by the alligators. What we try to do is train them to station, meaning we want the male to only accept food from one location. We want the female to only accept food from another. And the reason for that is if you need to catch them up for any reason, it's much easier if the animal has been programmed to come to you with a certain point, and then it's no small task. I mean, you've got to essentially jump on the animal, grab its jaws, and restrain it while somebody puts some tape around the jaws, and then whatever purpose you might have for catching it up, maybe medication or something, you can go about the task. But you first have to make sure the jaws are taped and restrained.
Right. Now, and I had heard, this is something I heard, that if an alligator and a crocodile are both similar in this fashion, that the chomping down is incredibly powerful, but they don't have much muscle to open up their mouth once they're closed. They
wouldn't need much.
Right. You could almost hold their mouth closed with your hands.
If you were to look at a crocodile skull, both the lower jaw and the upper skull, you'll see fairly good size openings, and that's where the muscles attach. And of course, as the muscles contract, they they bulk up. So these holes accommodate that bulking. And when they open their mouth, of course, they stretch like a rubber band. And when they snap down on a prey animal, then the muscles concentrate in these openings. And they do. They have incredible strength. I've heard upward to like a quarter of a million pounds per square inch.
Like snap metal.
It's just absolutely amazing. You don't want to have one crunch down on your arm or leg.
But is it true that you can't actually like hold them closed once they're closed?
Sure, you can. Although technically they have very little strength in opening up, but they can roll and twist. And hanging on may not be quite as easy as it sounds. But a young alligator, I mean, like a hatchling, you can hold the jaw shut with 2 fingers. But you got a 12-foot or 13-foot animal, you're going to have some help, because that animal will just twist out from your grip.
Now, I think it was a Neil deGrasse Tyson thing I was listening to where someone was talking about ornery crocodiles, and he said that crocodiles and alligators really only eat like once or twice a month or so, and they're typically only angry during those times that they're hungry. Is that a true statement, or is that maybe him just talking about the fact that most lizards don't tend to eat too often?
I would say anger is the wrong word. They certainly can become aggressive when they're hungry. And to say they only eat twice a month, that may be true. It also may be true that a crocodilian, a large one, could go for a year without food. They're opportunists, and they ambush when the opportunity presents itself. And so I would not want to test my luck by standing near the water edge where I know there are saltwater crocodiles, just because I know that they've been feeding.
And, like just assuming they're not still hungry.
I think they would still pose a threat.
Now, I saw that you do have some venomous snakes here. The black mambas, I saw that you have a couple of them. I think you have some cobras here as well. Is that true?
Yeah, sure.
And how dangerous are these snakes? I know the black mamba, I believe, is the one they call the 2-step or the 3-step snake. Is that an exaggeration?
That's kind of an American GI fable. That and they usually attribute that to some small snake in the tropics that bite you and you take 2 steps and drop dead. In fact, there are probably no snakes that are going to kill you that quickly. Even the most toxic venoms, like the Australian taipan, presumably are going to take considerably more time than that. There's so many variables that I can't say to you the victim's going to last for 5 hours or 5 minutes. It depends on your health, how much venom is injected, et cetera, but the mamba, for example, is a snake. The black mamba is sometimes aggressive, and that aggression is probably somewhat of a bluff. They certainly are not terribly intelligent by our standards, but they're smart enough to know that an animal the size of a human being is potentially dangerous. So they would maybe rush you with the mouth open, hoping that would be enough to scare you away. And it usually works. That's not to say if you were foolish enough to just stand your ground that they wouldn't bite you. And if they did, the venom is a neurotoxin, and it paralyzes, and they're very deadly snakes. On the other hand, you got a gaboon viper, which has very long, retractable fangs, and they're ambushers. They would never attack you. They just lie perfectly still on the forest floor and wait for an opportunity.
Unless you pose an immediate threat to them.
If you step so close, and that's true for a timber rattlesnake in Pennsylvania. They'll never, ever come after you. However, if you step so close, the snake feels it's being threatened. It's obviously going to try to protect itself, and it would strike you. But I don't call that an attack.
Right.
A strike and an attack are two different things. An attack is where the animal is leaving its position and pursuing you. And the only snake I know of in Pennsylvania that might do that would be a black racer, which is essentially a harmless snake. And again, it's a bluff.
Okay.
But our venomous snakes are not aggressive.
That's interesting. All right. How has there ever been an incident on site where someone has come in contact with one of these that has gotten bitten by one of these snakes that you know of?
Yeah, we've had those.
Have you ever been?
Yes, I have, not since I've owned Reptiland, but I had 5 bites prior to going into business, and the worst was a western diamondback rattlesnake that bit me on the hand 3 times. I was holding them, and he whipped out of my grip, and I ended up 2 weeks in the Air Force hospital in San Antonio, and then a couple of months of recuperating and working with my hand trying to keep it limber, because there was a lot of necrosis, a lot of tissue damage, and in those days incision and suction was considered the appropriate treatment. So we made 16 small incisions and applied suction, but in the process we probably severed some ligaments and things. So even though I still have my hand and all of my digits, I do suffer at this age, at least from kind of an arthritic thumb here, the result of that bite. Here at Reptiland, we've had a few bites, none recently, and I hope that we don't have any more. But we had a spitting cobra bite one of our employees about probably close to 20 years ago, and we had the appropriate snake bite serum, and we administered that at the hospital, and he came through it fine. My son Chad had a bite from a small Asian viper called a purple spotted viper when he was about 15 years old. Just the one thing in the end of a finger, but it was painful.
Yeah.
He had another bite from a Mexican can teal, which is a relative of the water moccasin. And that was an interesting bite. It only grazed him with on the side of the finger with one fang, but there was enough envenomation to cause a lot of swelling. It progressed up his arm, down his side, and then migrated back to his arm a day and a half later. So interesting bite. Wasn't life-threatening, but
yeah, it's a little weird that it would act that way.
Yeah.
Okay. The Komodo dragon that you have here. Now, I know it's a type of monitor. So I know that because I've dealt with monitors at my former job plenty of times, I know that they have a lot of bacteria and things in their saliva. I guess that it's what lines their gums, almost like a gingivitis kind of.
Well, in the wild, Komodo dragons eat a lot of carrion, and they hang around fetid water, that water buffalo and other animals have defecated in. So it is true that if you get bitten by a wild dragon, you're probably going to succumb to infection before you die of something else. But the fact of the matter is, we now know that Komodo dragons and all lizards, with the exception of geckos and skinks and maybe one other family, all lizards are venomous.
Okay.
They have trace amounts of venom. They don't have, in the case of a Komodo dragon, they don't have a good delivery system. That is, they don't have a hollow or grooved tooth to channel the venom into the victim, but it probably causes excessive bleeding. So when they rake the leg of a water buffalo, for example, the venom may well cause more bleeding than would normally be the case. But then infection sets in, and the dragons just hang around patiently until the water buffalo collapses a week or a week and a half later, and then they move in and they tear it apart. And their teeth are like serrated steak knives, so they can rip apart an animal with a hide as tough as a water buffalo, and do it quite successfully.
Yep, and I do know too that when they're in captivity, a lot of times because of the food that they're given is antibiotic laced, ridden, and whatnot, that a lot of times that bacteria in their mouth when they're in captivity is not there at the levels that it exists in the wild.
No, it's not necessarily because of I mean, we don't feed them anything that's laced with with antibiotics that we're aware of, but I think it's more simply the case that in captivity they're not being fed carrion. They're being fed freshly killed animals or thawed animals in the case of frozen rats and things.
Clean things.
And we have had a Komodo bite here.
Okay.
And although the victim was given antibiotics as a precaution, we talked to some colleagues at Los Angeles Zoo. They've had a number of bites, and they said they just treat the Komodo dragon bite like any other lizard bite, which is you clean out the wound and you don't worry about it.
Okay.
So I think the bacteria thing is true with wild dragons, but I don't see any evidence of it being true in captivity.
Right. Okay. Now, I think that, and I think this is actually true for most lizards, to be of this size in general, to be honest, is I think the biggest danger for me isn't in their bite, it's their tails are just such weapons that they whip. Is that the Komodo dragon, like an iguana? Do they use...
that's not really. I mean, they do slap. Iguanas especially use their tail to slap, but that... I wouldn't say it's terribly dangerous. It stings a little bit if it catches you just right. But with the dragon, no. The thing you worry about are those jaws.
Okay.
Because we had our head of our animal department, the same guy, in fact, who got bitten by the alligator I mentioned, had 60% of his Achilles tendon sliced through by our male Komodo dragon last December. So the real danger is in those jaws, and we have subsequently had a local firm called Equinox design some leggings out of some Kevlar-like material. So our keepers never go in with them without putting the leggings on. Furthermore, as with the rangers on the island of Komodo, if you were to visit there, they use a forked stick. We go in also with a fork-like stick that we use to keep them away from us if they decide that they're going to make a meal of us.
How quick are they?
They're quite quick. Once that dragon grabbed Jeff's ankle, it then pursued him. I mean, at that moment, I think the animal looked at him as prey.
Right.
Chased him out of the exhibit, and in order to get away from him, as I mentioned, he had a severe injury. He had to jump into the public area, slam the door, and call for help on his cell phone. So they are quite quick. When they're attacking a prey animal, you know,
because you always look at something that size and you think that you can run faster than this, that you can get away.
Well,
is that necessarily
I
true?
think you probably could outrun one. I don't. Yeah, I'm sure you can. I don't know exactly what their speed is, but like crocodiles, they do a lot of lying around. But when they're after a prey animal, it's a short burst of energy,
right?
And they ambush and grab an animal cause an injury, and then they just wait patiently until the animal dies.
Yep, and like it's one of those things where I've seen like a slow motion of like a shark attack where it just kind of creeps up so slowly, and then when it actually decides to attack and they play in slow motion, you see it frame by frame. You're like, wow, that's so fast. You don't even see all this stuff happening because it goes by in the blink of an eye.
It's very similar,
Yeah, okay. Now, their skin, it's made of a material called osteoderms, so that's supposed to make it more like a harder material. I've heard it been called like for anyone who's into like the fantasy, it's like a dragon skin, you know, like that hard material. How hard is it? Is that an exaggeration, or is it more like an armor?
Well, their actual scales or scutes are made of keratin, like your fingernail.
Okay.
But embedded in some of the scales are little bones called the osteoderms, as are the bones on the back of a crocodilian. In the case of crocodilians, there's a network of blood vessels that go up into the osteoderm, so that when the croc is trying to warm up from a cool evening, he can direct the blood, she can direct the blood from the osteoderm throughout the body and speed up the healing process. In the case of Komodo dragons and Gila monsters, their osteoderms, to my knowledge, are not used to disperse heat, but probably to add greater protection. So if you were to touch the skin of a Komodo dragon, it's very rough, almost like very rough sandpaper.
Okay. All right, you got some tortoises in here. Is it Aldabra? Is that the correct pronunciation?
It is.
Okay. Now I saw that they're about the size of a Galapagos tortoise. So they're
we have
big.
both. We have actually 5 Galapagos tortoises that are, I guess you'd say, teenagers. They're not yet sexually mature. They're probably in the neighborhood of 120 pounds or something right now, still growing. And they, of course, are native to the archipelago, a series of islands about 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador in the Pacific. They get up to 500 pounds plus. The other place in the world where you can still find giant tortoises is in the Indian Ocean, north of Madagascar. There's an atoll, an island which was the result of a coral reef, and there's quite a large population of Aldabra tortoises on this atoll called Aldabra. And they too get in the neighborhood of 500 or more pounds, and at the moment they're fairly well. Their future is fairly well assured because there's so many of them. There's like 100,000 or so.
Right. I saw on the endangered species list they're like not threatened, or like lightly threatened, I think is what it's termed as, or something like that.
Galapagos tortoises, on the other hand, have been badly depleted by sailors, through the 1700s and 1800s. Because they would catch them up, put them in the hold of a ship, and they would live for months without any food or water, and so it provided fresh meat for the sailors. And as a result of that, Galapagos tortoises have been wiped out on some islands in the archipelago, and greatly reduced the numbers on others. The Darwin Research Center on the island of Santa Cruz in the Galapagos has a program where they breed these various island tortoises. Each is somewhat unique, and the idea is that they then repatriate them to the island where their parents were located. And the island of Espanola, they were down to, I think, 11 tortoises on that island, and they took them to the research center. They began to breed them, and there's now a couple of thousand tortoises on Espanola. What we don't know is whether they'll successfully last many generations.
Okay.
Tortoises live a long time, and so the real test would be 500 years from now, are they suffering from inbreeding depression?
Right.
Or have they gotten through that bottleneck and have enough genetic diversity to survive?
Right.
That's yet to be seen.
Okay.
That's the problem with all captive breeding programs, where you try to reintroduce them to the wild. The challenge is to keep as much genetic diversity as possible within the population. And if you took all the zoos in the United States and put them together, it would take up less space than Brooklyn, New York.
Right.
So why I'm saying that is we don't have enough room to have large populations. So what we do is we have programs called species survival programs for each species, like Komodo dragons, for example. We have a bunch of geneticists in Lincoln Park, Chicago, and they look at the stud books, they look at the genetics of each individual animal, and they recommend which animal should be bred with another. And in that way, we try to maintain genetic diversity. Inbreeding generally is not a good idea.
No, it's not. I mean, you look at the royal families in Europe, and you see this with them, which is why, like in England, where they're marrying the peasants more now, because they can't keep marrying each other; they'll inbreed out of existence. How hard is it to keep animals of that size in I guess a confined area? Because I would imagine they don't get like the largest amount of space, you know what I mean?
Which animals? Oh, like the tortoises.
The tortoises, yeah. I mean,
well, obviously we try to give them as large a paddock in the summer as we can, and one of our long-range plans is to enlarge tortoise paddocks so that they hopefully would always have fresh grasses growing somewhere within the paddock.
Yeah.
Because they can denude a small paddock in a very short time. And they love to make water mud holes, you know. In fact, if you go to Galapagos, the place you're going to probably see wild tortoises are up in the highlands in some of the ranches where they just soak in these mud holes.
Yeah.
It's not exactly what you would envision if you see pictures of them on some of the islands are very dry and arid, but that's where they spend most of their time. They come down to the coast to lay their eggs, go back to the highlands, and that's where they live. In any case, it's a challenge to give them as much space as possible. Right now, we just recently built our what we call Island Giants building. Yeah. And we have given the Komodo dragons about 1,250 square feet. And the giant tortoises have about 500 square feet. Those are two large Aldabra males. We have some small Aldabras, which we're raising off display right now. I won't live long enough to see them reach sexual maturity, but hopefully amongst them there are some females. And
how long does it take a tortoise to reach sexual?
Oh, they can reach maturity, I think, around 30 years. It's more size than age, but you don't want to grow them too fast. And you want to keep them on a very low protein diet, a lot of roughage. If you've ever seen captive tortoises that are pyramided, where the scoops. In fact, our Galapagos tortoises are pyramided because they were started by someone who evidently was not feeding them a low protein diet. And they may not have given them quite enough moisture. That's another thing that seems to be a requirement. Now, they'll do fine with this pyramiding, but you'll never see a wild tortoise
Right.
with pyramiding.
That's not the natural shape structure. Okay. All right. Your Dinosaurs Come to Life exhibit. I saw a couple pictures of this online, but can you tell me what would people find in this exhibit, and how long did it take you to get it started?
Well, first of all, Dinosaurs Come to Life is a combination of full-scale models that don't move, and those models are here year-round.
Okay.
And then interspersed are animatronic models that we rent from a company in Texas.
Okay.
And the reason we rent them, quite honestly, is they have a latex-like skin over the animatronic mechanism, and UV combined with constant movement wears it out, and you have to put a new skin on every couple of years.
So it's just cheap.
And we just have enough headaches without adding one more to our list.
Right. You have enough animals to take care of. You
That's right,
take care of the machines too.
But it's been a very popular exhibit. Everybody likes dinosaurs.
Right.
I guess they really stimulate the imagination of kids and adults alike.
Right. Now, I would imagine you don't have humans riding dinosaurs in this exhibit, like some exhibits down south do.
No, we have one dinosaur where we do have a photo opportunity. Kids can climb on it if they want to, but no, we.
You don't have man and dinosaur walking along the earth together.
Oh, no. That's absolutely a false idea.
Right.
I see where you're going.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's a creation museum in Kentucky where they try to. Ken Ham tries to promote the idea that humans and dinosaurs coexist.
It's amazing to me the guy who can be so intelligent as to invent the MRI machine can then do something like this.
I think in his case, ignorance is bliss. He prefers to remain ignorant, and for whatever reason, it makes him happy. And as Frank Sinatra once said, "Whatever gets you through the night."
But what would they find at your exhibit then?
Well, we first of all, the colors on the animals is strictly the imagination of an artist. No one knows what the coloration of these animals were. My guess is that they probably, by and large, didn't display a lot of colors, much like rhinoceros and elephants don't display a lot of color. But the actual manifestation of the model, the way the artist created it, I think is pretty much based on what we know about fossil skeletons that have been discovered. Obviously, you can look at an existing animal that's still extant, and you can extrapolate that to fossil remains and probably come pretty close to what the animal looked like in life. And our signage is careful to say that some of this is imagination.
Right.
We have one that sprays water well.
Right.
It's highly unlikely that any dinosaur ever sprayed water. That's kind of a gimmick. Kids love it.
Obviously.
But we try to make it as educational as we can.
Wasn't it like the Dilophosaur, I think, that spat poison? So, I mean, they do spit. Like, there's some of them did.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with
Okay.
But,
what about like the recent findings that say like dinosaurs would have mostly been feathered as opposed to lizard skin?
Well, we still have dinosaurs, according to paleontologists at the American Museum of Natural History. Birds are living dinosaurs, and birds are now classed as reptiles.
Really?
The way we classify animals today is through cladistics. That is, by their evolutionary relationship. And the closest living relatives to crocodiles and alligators are birds. And so whereas we used to say a reptile was cold-blooded or ectothermal, covered with dry, horny scales, and it developed from within an egg, we now say to be a reptile, its ancestors had scales.
Okay.
Well, you look at the leg of our emu, or any bird, and
it's pretty
covered with scales. It's very reptile-like.
Yeah.
So it's very believable. And if you look at the habits of crocodilians and compare them to birds, it becomes even more believable. They build nests. They communicate by sounds. They protect their young. Very bird-like.
Right. Okay. That's neat. All right. I have a question as a reptile keeper. Do all reptiles require UVB light?
No.
No. Okay.
Some nocturnal reptiles, Afghanistan leopard geckos, for example, could be raised in total darkness without any damage.
Okay.
As with snakes. Snakes, presumably, the hypothesis is that at some point in their evolutionary history, they were forced into an underground, a fossorial existence, and they basically streamlined. They got rid of ear openings, which collect dirt.
Right.
They got rid of movable eyelids, which collect dirt, and they got rid of legs, which get in the way if you're trying to squeeze through a crevasse or something.
Right.
And by the way, when back to taxonomy for a moment, snakes are now considered to be another form of legless lizard.
Okay.
Whereas they used to be separated,
Yes.
they are now classed as lizards.
Okay. Okay. So then, all right. So you said that they don't need this because I have read online there are people who say that all reptiles need it regardless of whether they're nocturnal or not because they'll still get UVB light from reflected moonlight and stuff.
Well, I don't know that I can speak definitively about it, but I can tell you that we have raised snakes for 50 years here without any exposure to UVB. And for all that I can tell, they've done quite well. They reproduce, there's no indication that their bones are any more porous than a wild-caught snake. So I'm inclined to think they don't need it. They may benefit in some way if they have it, but I don't see the evidence. Now, you take an iguana, I think there's no doubt.
Right.
An iguana needs exposure to UVB to get good bone growth, and so if we're keeping a lizard like that, for example, we have a Cuban iguana back there right now, a land iguana. That animal will get direct exposure UVB in the wintertime through artificially through lamps, and in the summertime it's outside where it's getting sunlight. Same with the Komodo dragons.
What percentage of the reptiles that you keep here do you think? Is it about a 50-50 split between what do and what don't, or?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't.
You never really thought about it?
I haven't really given that much thought.
Yeah.
I think we're probably heaviest on snakes and we have a lot of frogs.
Okay.
Not that we display a lot of frogs at Reptiland, but we have 2 large-scale frog exhibitions that travel the United States. And one of them, by the way, is going to open at the Lycoming Mall from September through the end of the year.
Okay.
And so we have a tremendous number of frogs, but probably heaviest on snakes and frogs.
Okay. The butterfly exhibit. What is this like a more of a gimmick, or is it something that you've really put a lot of thought into, and you have many different kinds of species of butterfly in there?
We, when we began to think about what
I guess I love butterflies.
what new attractions we might build here, we started out with a butterfly exhibit because they've been very popular at zoos and museums throughout the country. And we decided to go primarily with native butterflies. We didn't want to get into importing chrysalises or blue morphos and all the tropical stuff. And I think there's just something very calming and pleasing, kind of a passive recreation for people to stroll through the butterfly garden, or butterfly house, if you will. And there's something magical about a butterfly landing on your pink blouse or whatever it is, you know. And so even though they're not reptiles, they're invertebrates, not vertebrates. It's been a very popular attraction, and we don't have any intent of disbanding it. We'll keep them.
I remember my pap, who is one of those, he is one of the manliest of men, a hard-working, nose to the grindstone kind of guy. Even he loves what he calls flutterbys. They're not butterflies, they're flutterbys because they flutter by, is what he always says. Do you have any upcoming exhibits maybe that you're a little bit excited about? Or
because we put a lot of resources into the Komodo dragon building, we probably are not going to open anything major new for a couple more years, but the things that we hope we can do in a reasonable amount of time is build a crocodilian building where we can display like a big saltwater crocodile as well as American alligators, and possibly have underwater viewing. And we'd like to build a tortoise area where we can give them additional indoor space in the winter, as well as large paddocks, which I mentioned earlier. Those are the two big ones, and they're very resource demanding projects. So we have to get a few admissions through the door to pay for Komodos before we move on.
Absolutely. Well, and I think as for somebody like me who's lived in this area, you travel right by here all the time. And I think I've been here once when I was a kid. And it's the saddest thing because I love reptiles, I love zoos, and it's just, I always think, oh, what do I want to do this weekend? Why not Reptile Land? Why do I never think of Reptile Land? It's the silliest thing. But, all right. I think this is probably something that you'll be able to talk about it, right? And it's the conservation of certain of these animals. How many endangered species do you have? Rough estimate.
Well, the Komodos are endangered. We have a golden frog, which is endangered, which, by the way, we are not breeding. A couple of zoos went together, went to Central America and grabbed as many golden frogs as they could, brought them back and began breeding them in captive populations. The reason they did that, there is a wave of disease called chytrid fungus, which is moving through Central America and wiping out all frogs. Totally wiping them out. And the golden frog is, as far as we know, extinct now in the wild. But the species survival plan for golden frogs, the committee asked some zoos just to hang on to some of them as kind of backup, and they might ask other zoos to breed them. And once again, even though it's a little more difficult with amphibians, the geneticists attempt to keep as much genetic diversity as possible in the captive population. But that's the way it works with the Komodo dragons too. We will not, we won't intentionally breed the ones we have now because they're brother or sister.
Mm-hmm.
But when the committee says to us, okay, we would like you to send your female to, let's say, Denver, and San Antonio send you another female, then we would intentionally begin to breed them.
Okay.
Now, it may be that right now this female is about to lay eggs. And if she does, and we may choose actually to freeze the eggs. We may hatch a couple of them just to give ourselves some experience hatching Komodo dragon eggs. But if we did that, those offspring would not ever go back into the species survival plan.
Okay.
They would not be part of the breed.
They would not be part. Okay. Okay. What is the biggest danger to most reptiles today? Is it poaching or is it like climate change?
It's probably both. In Madagascar, tortoise populations are being depleted at an incredible speed because tortoises and turtles are eaten primarily in China,
Mm-hmm.
and all Asian turtles and tortoises are in great danger of extinction. So that's a poaching situation.
Okay.
On the other hand, global warming is threatening some species. Again, on Madagascar, a friend of ours, Chris Rexworthy at the American Museum of Natural History, has been studying a species of gecko that lives on a narrow band of a mountain.
Okay.
And as the temperatures have warmed, it has forced this gecko species up the mountain, and when it reaches the top, it will undoubtedly go extinct.
Right.
Because it will be out of...
It's getting narrower and
Yes,
narrower.
that's right. Out of the parameters of temperatures and humidity
Mm-hmm.
that animal needs to survive.
Okay.
The pet industry has been detrimental to some populations of animals, although I think hide hunting and poaching for food far outweighs what has occurred as a result of the pet industry. Hide hunting of crocodilians and snakes for leather has been a problem. Now, crocodilians are being farmed in Louisiana, Florida,
Mm-hmm.
East Africa, all over the world. And I think that's a good thing because whatever the motivation, you might argue, well, people shouldn't, wear crocodile skin shoes or boots.
Right.
However, if they have some commercial value, those animals stand a much better chance of surviving than if they don't. And if they can be farmed, now there's been an attempt to farm pythons for leather, and I'm not sure how successful that has been. It may be, I've heard this, maybe a front for really going out and hunting wild pythons and claiming that they were captive raised.
Right.
Because they don't grow that rapidly. To get a python up to, well, I don't know. It takes a lot of meat. Let's put it that way.
Most reptiles grow fairly slowly.
Yeah, but they can get a crocodile under ideal conditions, probably up to the size they butchered them, I think, is around 4 feet.
Okay.
And they can do that in maybe 3 years.
Really?
They keep them in the dark. They keep them very, very warm, and they feed them, an incredible quantity of food.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people might argue it's a cruel thing to do, and I might be able to agree with them. But again, it alleviates the pressure on the wild populations. Nobody wants to go out and poach them, because those skins are very often scarred anyway. If they can raise them in captivity and they're not scarred, it takes pressure off the wild population.
If people are going to do what people do, we can at least try and limit the effect of what they do. Okay. I like that mentality, because at least something is getting done at that point, and you're not gridlocking and just arguing all the time. What would you say is probably the most detrimental pet to the reptile population? Like, because you had said that the pet industry had hurt a couple.
Well, I think until some woman by the name of Barker, Tracy Barker, went to Central America many years ago and showed them how to set up farms for raising iguanas. Prior to that, they were being taken from the wild. And I'm sure that they had a negative impact on the wild populations. Right now, I don't know. I mean, most of the things that I see in the reptile line, I don't know. I would say if they're selling boas or pythons, they're probably captive born animals. I'm not sure that up until recently they were selling a lot of Burmese pythons. Now the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has banned the interstate movement of pythons, which has essentially put a lot of python breeders out of business. And that's kind of unfortunate, because it's the same thing I was talking about with crocodiles. If there's a market for them and people breed them and sell them for a profit, it probably alleviates pressure.
Well, I
on
think
wild
that too
populations.
was a situation where Florida was just kind of ruining it for the rest of the country, because they were having an issue in Florida where people were just releasing these giant Burmese pythons out into the Everglades, and they're just taking them.
That's true, but that's a local problem. That's not a national problem.
Exactly.
Ken Salazar, who was then head of the Department of Interior, over which they oversee fish and wildlife, he made an a priori statement that we are going to ban the interstate movement of pythons because they're a threat to the whole United States. Well, anybody who had any experience with these animals knew that was absolutely ridiculous. That if you have a Burmese python and it's exposed to 50, 55 degrees for a couple of days, it's going to probably die of respiratory infection. But they did a study.
The Everglades were just a good place for them.
Yeah, in the Everglades they are a problem, but anything north of Okeechobee they're not. And they did a study claiming that these things could migrate with global warming as far north as southern Pennsylvania, Delaware, across the southern portion of the United States up the coast of California. It would have to get 30 degrees warmer than it is now for anything close to that to make it possible. And
because even if the average temperature year-round is high enough, it's still there will be a week or two during the winter that it's going to drop down below 50 degrees, and that will kill them.
Even in the Everglades, every year, every couple of years, they have a freeze, and it kills them back. It doesn't get them all, and some of them make it through, but they're not going to get any further north than where they are now, unless if the planet gets that much warmer, we have a lot more problems than worrying about pythons.
I mean, I think Pennsylvania probably won't exist anymore at that point, so I feel like we'll be talking about some different things.
That's right.
Exactly. All right, so let me see where we're at here. All right, we got about 5 minutes or so that I want. So let me just ask you, what's your personal favorite reptile?
I get that question often. And,
is it hard to answer?
I guess I give them different answers at different times. I don't have favorites. There's some that obviously have some unusual adaptation that makes them maybe a little more fascinating than another. But I really, truly like all wildlife. I happen to have spent my life specializing in reptiles and more recently in amphibians. But, I take people on safaris all over the world, and we don't just look at reptiles and amphibians, we look at all animals. So I don't think I have a favorite. I think it's kind of neat the way a cobra has evolved to bluff its way out of a tight situation by flattening the neck and expanding the neck with the ribs and creating that hood. We have a Vietnamese rat snake on display in the reptile house, which has a very long, slender snout, probably to make it look more like a leaf to a predator like a bird of prey who might overlook it. Geckos have hundreds of thousands of small hairs on their toes, which allow them to cling to a smooth surface by molecular bonding. These kind of things fascinate me, but I don't know that they're favorites. I just find the evolution of life on this planet and the diversity of life on this planet to be extraordinary.
So maybe a better question, what's your favorite evolutionary trait? Could that be one? All right.
I guess you'd have to say any living organism has adapted to its local environment. And what may seem unusual to me, like the gecko's toes, is just another way to make a living for that particular organism. And no better or worse than a water snake that you might find down along a farm pond is adapted for catching frogs. It may not be quite as exciting to me because I lived my whole life here in Pennsylvania and I've seen thousands of water snakes, whereas a gecko from Madagascar is a little more unusual, but they're both ideally adapted to their particular situation.
Okay. Do you ever wish that maybe you hadn't specialized in just reptiles for most of your life, that you maybe would have branched out and done a little more? Or are you starting to do that now?
The problem is I grew up in central Pennsylvania, and we have a small population base, a small market area. And for better or worse, I decided to build Reptiland here in this little community of Allenwood, and this area would never sustain a full zoo. People have tried to build another Bronx Zoo in various places, but most of the time, unless you're independently wealthy from some other means, you're not going to be able to provide the resources that are required to do justice to large hoofstock, megavertebrates, big cats, etc. So I've always been content to specialize in animals that I felt I could do justice to them and try to display them in a way that was meaningful to our visitors. And I couldn't do that with lions and tigers.
Well, I can definitely tell you, though, for somebody who's grown up in this area, having Reptiland here is definitely something that we kind of brag about. It's definitely a point of pride, I think, for the area, because we don't have too much. So it's nice that somebody who did come out of this area, who went on to do something good, came back and built something here.
Well, I've often wondered if it was a smart idea, because it's not been easy in the last 50 years to start with essentially nothing and grow it into an accredited zoo. And I always wanted to be a legitimate zoological park and not a roadside zoo in the old traditional sense. So that means that profit can't be the first thing on your agenda. You have to pour the money back into the facilities, and so we've tried to do that. We've been accredited since 1986, and we go through it every 5 years.
Yep. Well, all right. So we are a little over the hour mark, so I really want to thank you for taking the time to do this for me, and maybe I can come back again, and we'll do this again in another couple of months, and maybe next time we can get a little more in depth about a couple specific things you have